Hi, folks. Um, I'm going to do some commentary on the pages 146 to 151, and this is in the London and Stone short course in photography. Um, we don't teach very much about strobe or artificial light in um, the first photo class. This is something that is considered to be advanced techniques, and it's really important for beginning photographers to learn how to use natural light. And once you learn how to use natural light, and if you decide to go and start using artificial light, 9 times out of 10, you do want to try and come up with a look that imitates natural light. So that's why we don't just let people grab their flash units and start flashing this and that in the beginning level, because you'll come up with some rather weird shadow patterns, weird highlights, and it's going to confuse you more than help you. But a little bit about flash, just to whet your appetite. On page 146, it starts out with artificial light sources. And the second chunk says continuously burning incandescent lamps. Now, there's two kinds of lamps. One of them is the incandescent, which uses a filament to heat up, and it can be very hot. And the last sentence says professional photographers call these hot lights. They're not good for taking pictures of people because people start to sweat. They feel like they're being interrogated. And they're not good for people shots because the pupils in the eyes constrict because there's so much hot light coming down on the person. And portrait photographers over the years have figured out that it's better to have the pupil rather large in the for a more relaxed kind of look in the subject. Now, recently there's been movement towards continuous burning LED bulbs. And if you were going to buy anything that was a continuously burning light source, do not buy the incandescent. They can fall to the ground, and when they break, the hot glass from the bulbs can actually literally burn and stick to your skin and create scars. They're that hot. So don't buy the photo flood bulbs. But if you want to, go to the video section of B&H Photography or any other Adorama and take a look at the LED banks of lights, and you can buy a panel that might measure 6 inches by 10 inches or a little bit bigger. And those lights are just as bright, but they're cool lights, and you can touch them and they don't burn. So take a lesson from some of the old guys and say, not for me, hot lights, I don't want those. Then you have flash, electronic flash or strobe. And in the bottom right hand corner you have a picture of a Nikon, and it has a flash attachment on top of it. The problem with the flash, when you're using a flash, is that you're never quite sure how strong it is, whether it's doing what you want it to. So you'll have to be able to really have a close look after you take a picture, and I mean a real close look, zoom in on it on the LCD screen, and evaluate, do I have distracting shadows, or do I have the right amount of light to make my statement a better statement, or do I have not enough light? So we'll just jump ahead for a minute where it says automatic flash units. I highly recommend, if you're going to be doing any serious event photography, wedding photography, that you buy a very compatible automatic flash unit. They're called dedicated flash units. Sometimes they're called speed lights. And you buy the same brand as your camera. There's all sorts of electronic wiring that goes in between the camera and the flash. So it can make your life easy once you understand how to run the unit. Now, think back to the beginning of the class, and I asked for you to buy a aftermarket guidebook for your camera, because cameras are complicated, and I'm sure I've heard from several of you that it's really helped you to understand your camera. If you decide to buy an automatic flash, you will also need to purchase another aftermarket guidebook that goes along with the flash that you bought. You just don't strap a flash onto the top of the camera and get effective use from it. You can get a very simple automatic kind of use from it, but after all, you're trying to become more than just a snapshot photographer, and if you chunk out $300 or $400 for a flash, you have to understand how to use it, and that gets kind of tricky. So you also want to get a flash bracket, and a flash bracket will attach the camera to the flash unit, but it will separate, it will give a distance between the flash and the lens of the camera, and that will get rid of pesky shadows that happen behind people. You want to have a flash bracket to use, and then you'll have to have some cords to go from the hot shoe to the shoe of the bracket mounted flash. So it's just not, toss your money on the counter and walk out and strap everything together. There is a learning curve to it. So back to column 1, flash must be synchronized with the camera shutter. If you do not synchronize the shutter speed with the flash, you're going to end up with less than a full frame that's lit evenly. If you decide to use a shutter speed of 1,000, you may only get a quarter of the picture. If you go down to 500th, you might get a half of the picture. So what we teach in photography that's seemingly a safe shutter speed, a default shutter speed that you can use on any camera, on any flash unit, is 1/60th, 1/60. Now, open up your camera manual and look up the flash sync speed. Most cameras these days, the Canons and Nikons and Panasonics, etc., most cameras will have a flash sync speed faster than a 60th, 1/25th of a second, maybe 1/250th of a second. But you can always use 60, and your flash will like you if you do that. So the automatic flash units, they have something called thyristor circuitry. That's just a fancy electronic battery saving mechanism. An automatic flash has different burn times. So if you're running your flash on manual, and then the flash is going to produce 100% flash, and it will eat up quite a bit of your battery every time you flash the camera. If you have thyristor circuitry, and most modern strobe lights do, what will happen is that the flash will turn on and it will measure how much light is coming back to the flash unit, and it will shut the electronic burn off. So you may be able to only use a quarter of the energy that you would be using on manual full power. So just like your camera has electronic eyes and it uses it to calculate exposure, the flash units have electronic eyes and they use it to calculate how much light is needed to give you the effect that you want, and then it shuts off the burn time. All of the times that I'm talking about are instantaneous seeming. Flashes will flash up to 1/1,000,000th of a second, or 1/50,000th of a second. So you won't be able to tell. Your eyes will just be blinking and dazzling whether you got a quarter of a flash or a half of a flash or a full flash. But you'll, if you're working in automatic, the camera is so sensitive that it will be able to make a judgment and shut the flash off before it uses all the manual power. Now we get into a real tricky thing here. The next paragraph, determining your own exposure with flash. If you're going to be an event photographer, a wedding photographer, you need to buy a strobe meter, and you'll want to buy a hybrid. If you're going to be buying a strobe meter, it might as well measure reflected light as well. So it'll be an incident light meter and it will be a reflected light meter. Page number 147 looks like something from a photo book that was written in the 1950s. It has the inverse square law, which talks about how light dims rapidly as it leaves the flash unit. It's very bright right at the flash unit. And then in a mathematical ratio, it will dim quickly as the distance goes out. So here's a whole bunch of math coming in here. The second illustration will show you with pictures. It'll show you at 3 feet, I'm sorry, at 5 feet you need f16, and at 10 feet, which is double the distance, you need f8. Well, in between 16 and f8 there's 11 and 8. So you're using more f-stops. So just understand that a flash of light can be very bright when it's close to the camera, but that bright light will not reach out 20 feet without dimming considerably. Now, the bottom illustration on page 147 talks about bouncing your light. Direct flash, when you have the flash unit set to illuminate your subject directly, straight on, you usually get pretty harsh shadows and pretty bleached out highlights. So photographers have learned that it's easier to bounce the light whenever possible off of some kind of a reflecting surface. And if you're going to do that, and if you're going to do the mental math, you have to remember to take the measurement from the flash to the ceiling, and then from the ceiling down to the subject. It's not, the distance is not from the lens to the person. It's longer than that. And by the way, if you're reflecting off of something like acoustical tile ceiling, you will lose f-stops. That it acts like a sponge. And so if you're figuring everything out with your mental math and you're getting underexposures, well, the reason for that is that the surface is absorbing some of the light energy and you're not getting it reflected down onto your subject. So be careful about the textures that you're bouncing off of, and be very careful about the colors. If you're in a hospital and it has a green ceiling and you bounce the light off of the green ceiling, your subject is going to look green. So shutter speed is constant. You'll notice here at the bottom of page 147, you don't go diddling around and changing your shutter speeds. 160 is always good, but what you do change is your f-stop, and what you do change is the energy that the strobe is going to use. So you can make it full power, half power, or a third power. So we're flipping the page to 148, and I think that one is pretty self-explanatory. The poor little puppy dog down on the bottom is a victim of direct flash. Not usually what we call not the best picture. On page 149, it shows you what happens, upper left, direct flash. You get a very flat face. It's not sculpted, it's not featured. There's no shadow patterns on the face. So you can move your camera you can move your flash off with a cord or a bracket, and you can start to see some shadow on the side of the nose and the side of the cheek. And then down on the bottom here we have a bounce light, and the light is coming off of the ceiling, and it's actually shading some of the eyes because he's got this outfit on that has like the bill of a hat. So instead of using the ceiling, you could bounce it off of a white wall, and you can get the picture on the bottom right, which I think is probably the most pleasant of all four of them. So using Flash Direct on page 150, that's kind of a Diane Arbus type of shot, which is real gutsy and gritty. And then on page 151, the shadows of the man, notice that the shadows of the man are kind of coming forward. So he would be a silhouette if you didn't use a flash. So this is like event photography. When I'm shooting a wedding, I'll always put the sun at the back of the people, or to the side and the back of the people, and then I'll use my flash to bring out the flesh tones and the expressions in the people. So the backlight acts as a hair light and a rim light, and it makes people look nice, but you have to have the fill light from the strobe set at the proper. You don't want to have it overpowered or underpowered. Have it set at the proper settings, and then you'll have a much nicer look for your groups and events. So that's it for this segment.